Y a todos en el ECO y en Fundación Alumnos que hicieron posible este evento. Solo brevemente quiero hablar un poquito de cómo se inició la Cátedra Goeritz. Se inicia con la intención de indagar sobre la relación entre arte y arquitectura, que es algo que para Mathias Goeritz fue fundamental. Y no solo esto, sino ir un poco más allá, pensando en la función social del arte y la arquitectura. Y nos hemos estado enfocando en proyectos de enseñanza. A lo largo del año se han hecho varios eventos, entre ellos conversaciones públicas como esta, encuentros con colegas de los que hay relatorías, y también un taller, se llama Taller Nómada, que se ha llevado a cabo ya en 2 ocasiones, que está inspirado en los cursos de educación visual que hizo Mathias Goeritz durante su vida. Esta es la tercera y última conversación pública que tendremos. Estamos muy felices de tener aquí a Britta y a Paula Braga, también muy agradecidos con Jessica, que va a moderar la conversación. Y como decía Tiago, ellos son socios en este proyecto. Tenemos otros socios a quienes también quiero dar las gracias. Fomento Cultural Banamex, la Facultad de Arquitectura de la UNAM también está involucrada, y la Dirección de Arquitectura de Limba, y de esta manera ha sido posible llevar a cabo este programa. Tenemos una página web que es catedragoeritz.org, en donde no solo está el programa, sino está el registro de las otras conversaciones, distintos contenidos comisionados para este sitio, entonces los invito también a verlo. Y bueno, esta noche el tema que nos atañe es espacios de inmersión, lugares para la experiencia pública. Y Jessica es crítica y curadora de arte, actualmente es directora en jefe de Fundación Alumnos, curadora en jefe, perdón, lo repetí ahí, y ella dentro de la Fundación ha comisionado más de 20 proyectos, muchos de ellos en espacio público, indagando sobre estas lógicas. Entonces pues nos hace todo el sentido que vaya a ser ella quien modere la conversación, y ojalá así sea eso, una conversación abierta entre todos nosotros.
Gracias. Muchas gracias por la invitación para conocer a Britta y a Paula y todo el trabajo que ha hecho la Cátedra Mathias Goeritz. Y sí nos gustaría realmente fomentar la conversación, entonces, aunque va a ser en inglés, como se anunció, quien se sienta quiera comentar o preguntar en español, hacemos la labor también de traducción para realmente integrar todo el trabajo y las presentaciones. Voy a presentar a Paula y a Britta. Paula es escritora, filósofa e historiadora del arte, experta en arte brasileño, y su estudio parte de cómo el concepto del arte participativo de los años 60 es utilizado por artistas contemporáneos. Tiene un doctorado, postdoctorado del Instituto de Artes de Unicamp en el área de teoría del arte en 2012, y su investigación ha sido acerca del arte en la era de las redes de comunicación. Su tesis doctoral investiga el trabajo del artista Elio Oiticica, que es lo que hoy Paula presentará, y Paula argumenta cómo la obra de Oiticica se basa en el concepto de creación colectiva, en donde conviven artistas y filósofos de diferentes épocas. La tesis de maestría de Paula presenta una influencia fuerte de Nietzsche en la obra de Oiticica. Hoy en día escribe para diversas revistas, como por ejemplo Bravo, de Sao Paulo, y otras de corte más académico, como Consinitas, en Río de Janeiro, Third Text, una publicación londinense, Ramona, de Buenos Aires. Algunos artículos que Paula ha escrito, como en 2010, por ejemplo, sobre el curador en la galería, publicado en O Oficio do Curador, editorial Souk. Y publicaciones son, por ejemplo, Elio Oiticica, Singularidad y Multiplicidad. Ese libro Paula lo acaba de compartir y donar a la biblioteca, entonces quien quiera consultarlo lo tendremos acá. Escrito en 2013, y la coordinación del libro Hilos Sueltos, el arte de Elio Oiticica, con también la editorial Perspectiva en 2008. Britta Peters es crítica de arte y curadora independiente. especialista en estudios culturales por la Universidad de Lüneburg, en Alemania. En 2007 curó Wilhelmsburger Freitag, un proyecto de arte en Hamburgo, en el espacio público. De 2008 a 2011 trabajó como directora artística del Kunstverein Hamburger Bahnhof en Hamburgo. En 2012 curó la exposición Demonstrationen vom Werden Demonstrations, the Becoming of Normative Orders, en el Kunstverein de Frankfurt, en colaboración con Normative Orders, Cluster of Excellence en la Universidad de Frankfurt. Otro proyecto de exhibición de Britta es Illness as Metaphor, Madness in the Garden of the Species, que inició en 2014 y continúa todavía en distintas sedes de Hamburgo, y en enero de 2015 asume el puesto de curadora del Sculpture Project Münster, que es de lo que nos va a compartir hoy, de lo que va a hablar a través de 3 casos en particular. Entonces, también está aquí Citlali, que trabaja con nosotros, lleva el área de nuestra biblioteca móvil. Entonces, para la Fundación ha sido interesante entender el espacio público desde ahí y desde la comisión de algunas de las piezas. Entonces, bueno, doy la palabra a Paula y continuamos. Gracias.
In fact, I have so many people to thank and acknowledge today, because I cannot describe how happy I am because I'm here. And this is the most perfect setting to talk about Jessica. I mentioned before that we're sitting in pillows and everybody grab a beer and enjoy the talk. And please let me know if you do not understand my pronunciation or any concept. Just stop me, raise your hand, and we'll start a conversation, okay? I want to thank very much the Cátedra, Mathias, Goeritz, the Fundación, Alumnos, and a very special thanks to wonderful artist Ricardo Redon, who put me in contact with these wonderful people I'm meeting here, Jessica, Paula, and David. Thank you very much. So, Jessica is an artist who started his career around 1957 in Brazil. He's an artist who comes from a very intellectual and bourgeois family in Rio de Janeiro. And as Jennifer was saying, he read a lot of philosophers. He read Nietzsche a lot, and it's very interesting to research about Jessica, because not only he developed works and projects and maquettes for his works, but also he wrote a lot. There are more than 8,000 pages that he left with his thoughts, his concepts, all culminating in the idea of the labyrinth, the idea of merging art and architecture in environmental works. And what are exactly these environmental works? Well, first I want to say that he comes from European modernism in his formation. So he has many works that he develops after Mondrian, Malevich, Paul Klee, as we see here in this page that he left in his archives, where he is projecting a two-dimensional work, a gouache, he would name Malekledrian in 1958, after Malevich, Klee, and Mondrian. He was doing things like this, like 40 years after Malevich, as a student, and looking a lot at Mondrian, he arrived at these bidimensional works. But what we see here is already that these rectangles want to escape from the plane. As you see, they are moving, they are not well settled. on the surface, and it continues through the 50s until he gets to something like this. And the shapes you are seeing here are not lines and lozangles. They are actually rectangles which have turned in space. So from that, he comes to this. He puts the rectangles directly in space. So we see here the similarity between the two things. And finally, in 1961, he writes on his journal this phrase that can lead us through his work. I aspire to the great labyrinth. It's very mysterious. Everybody who starts studying Helioetica reads this phrase and wonders, what is the great labyrinth he aspires to? Well, the great labyrinth is what he described as a static space in which you would be able to experience an aesthetic time. What is it? Well, it is something that is a space of freedom in the sense of being an environment for inventing oneself, from escaping from the molds and the control of our society. As you might have noticed, we are the product of everything we see, everything the internet sends to us, and we are now being controlled completely by satellites and everything. And Goeritz was already in the 60s seeing that happening. He was predicting it, and he was saying, well, we need spaces where one can develop his or her own subjectivity. What is subjectivity? In philosophy, subjectivity is the way you stand in the world, how you understand the world. What is the world? The cultural industry already in the 60s were kind of making everybody have a very shallow subjectivity or capacity of inventing what one is, how one stays in the world and understand the world. So Gilles Deleuze, the French philosopher, has developed the concept of the control society, following Foucault's work. And what is the control society? It's the hegemonic force that organizes our society. It has some disciplinary aspects, such as places where you are contained. For example, the school, you are inside a classroom, or the prison, you are in a cell, or the hospital, you are interned in a hospital. So the disciplinary society works with closed spaces that control your body. But the control society, it does not control your body, it controls your mind or your soul, as Deleuze would put it. It controls what you think about the world, about yourself, about other people. And what Goeritz was doing was mainly in the 70s, starting when he aspires to the great labyrinth, is trying to liberate an energy that would be the invention power. It's what he calls the loose threads of the experimental, the hilos sueltos del experimental. Well, in the same year that he writes, I aspire to the great labyrinth, only this phrase, he built a maquette for what would be a set of penetrables. What is a penetrable? It's something you enter into, you penetrate. So, the hunting dogs project was never built. It stayed as a maquette. And he proposes a sequence of aesthetic elements. You would enter this environment, it would be like a garden in the city, and you would experience the possibility of watching a very different theater play where you have a turning chair and you can turn and look around in several stages and things are happening simultaneously in several stages. Another environment where you would find a poem, a buried poem, you would have to look for the poem, and so on. And then he writes about this project. The individual would take refuge here, in the same way he does when he enters a museum, for aesthetic life experiences, as if they were something magical that could take him towards another plan, different from the quotidian plan. Here he talks about a museum. He says, entering this environment would be like entering a museum. But 10 years later, in 1971, the museum is something he finds totally insufficient to what he wants. So, from 1966 on, he develops the concept of cree-leisure. What is cree-leisure? It has to do with leisure, it has to do with creativity, but what it is a concept, and it is the deconditioned leisure, lazer descondicionado, that allows for the subjectivation process and resists to the forces of the spectacle society and the cultural industry. He is reading, of course, Herbert Marcuse and Guy Debord, which are two philosophers that develop respectively the concepts of repression and spectacle. So, at the same time, he is visiting and spending days and nights and having boyfriends at the Mangueira Slum in Rio de Janeiro. This is a picture of the Mangueira Slum in the 1960s. And it is amidst a marginalized community in Brazil that he encounters the resistance force against all these conditioning factors of the spectacle society and the cultural industry. Well, Mangueira is not only a slum, but it is a community that has a school of samba. Everybody here knows what a school of samba is? It's a huge parade of people dancing and singing samba. And he is very impressed to see that these people, after working hard hours during the day and living in very precarious conditions, would still have energy to create something like this. And he joins the Mangueira school, he learns how to dance samba. Here is Hélio e Jessica here in a parade of the Mangueira Samba School. And Mangueira is very important also for him to make a connection between everything he read from Nietzsche. When Nietzsche talks about the Dionysian force, he sees that at Mangueira every day during the rehearsals of the Samba School. And he says, I felt like stepping the earth again, feeling the world. And from this on, his work will be an emphasis on the body, and from the body, the formation of a subject with solid foundations on the interaction between the body and the urban space. So this is the Parangolé, one of the most famous works he develops, and it is not just a cape or something you dress It is something that demands that you dance with it, because when you dance with it, you capture an aesthetic force in the world. And then you see the colors and everything, and this is another kind of perangolé. And of course, it is possible to do a formal analogy between these and this, and also with the protests against the military dictatorship that were going on in Brazil. So what we see here, and what impresses Jessica, is the fact that a multitude would build something as powerful as the samba school or a political protest. And this was several years before Tony Negri coined the term multitude in his works. So what he was looking for was the leisure as the opposition, as the resistance to the surplus repression, which is a Marcusian concept. Everybody is repressed, psychologically repressed by the superego, for example, but the liberal society, capitalism, imposes a surplus repression and imposes the performative principle. What is the performative principle? You have to do something all the time, 24 hours a day. You have to do something that is useful, that is productive, that reverts on money. And Jessica wants to create environments and works that allows the individual to just be. Tropicalia from 1967 comes in this atmosphere of deconditioning people. Tropicalia is an environment made with sand and stones, and it has a parrot on it and plants. And the idea is that you walk around all these very sensorial elements, and you enter this labyrinth here, and you're gonna feel things on your skin, because he puts things falling from the ceiling that you don't see because it's all very dark in here, inside here. And then in the center of this labyrinth, there is a television turned on and showing the most mediocre TV show you can imagine, whatever is going on at this time you enter. And then you have this abrupt break between all these sensorial feelings and the TV determining what you have to feel, what you have to be, what you have to dress. And this is a more recent installation of Tropicalia at the Museum of Modern Art in Rio de Janeiro. It's very interesting that he puts this favela-like architecture inside the modern architecture of the Museum of Modern Art in Rio de Janeiro. And you see how things are kind of not so well organized, and it's very hard to install Tropicalia nowadays, because either you do this, which has nothing to do with the concept of the work, or you put some fences here so the museum doesn't get messed up with sand. But this is not the way Tropicalia should be, because Tropicalia follows what Gilles Deleuze called the nomadic behavior. The nomad, according to Deleuze, is the person who does not follow paths, predetermined paths. So the fence is not a good device here. As Deleuze put it, the sedentary space is created by walls, fences, and paths between fences, while the nomadic space is smooth, marked only by traces that disappear and dislocate themselves on the way. So Tropicalia should mess up the whole museum and invade other works. In 1969, he goes to London. He's fleeing from the dictatorship, not because he was being persecuted, but because he realized if he continued to do something he wanted, he would be persecuted by the dictatorship, and he develops the Eden. The Eden is this environment here, in which you do a promenade through many penetrables, where you step on water or leaves, or you just listen to music here, or you stay here doing whatever you want. Nobody's looking, it's closed, it has only this entrance here. So he wants the free behavior of the participant. He installed the Eden at the Whitechapel Gallery in London, looking for this free behavior. Here is the bed, he calls this the body, the bed. You just enter, you close this curtain, and you stay there, just being yourself, doing nothing. When he goes to New York in 1970, he builds for himself in his apartment several beds like this. So he stays there, reading, listening to music, and during the evening he would work as a bilingual telephone clerk or something like that. And you see that in several Oiticica's works, although he looks for the collective, for people gathering, for the multitude, he builds cells. You stay by yourself inside of these cells, but they are transparent. So you, in a way, can be connected to the other cell. For example, here, when you are inside this bed, you can still see the light and listen to noises from the outside. So being introspective and at the same time relating to the world. It's very different from what we do nowadays when we look at a cell phone, for example. We are unaware of the others. In 1971, he decided to build something at the Central Park in New York. Of course, it was never built, but this is the plan, the maquette. It's an environment where you enter, it's a labyrinth, and you are supposed to enter through here, and if there is someone here in this corridor, you're gonna feel it, because there is this transparent division here, and then you get to a place with plants. Here there are these cabins where you can stay, like in the body, the bed. These are nets, you jump, you do some dancing if you want here. And here you have some stages. People can enter the stage and perform whatever they want. So he's giving a structure, an architectural structure, to be installed in a public park so that people can perform whatever they want. He calls this self-performance, self-theater. And he calls it proposing to propose. It's to propose to the individual that he creates his own experiences in order that he liberates his contradictions, his fears, his repressed desires. A psychoanalyst does something like this with his patient. But his proposition is exclusive to the person who looks for his help. For the artist propositor who proposes, the patient is the world of individualities, the human being. And after this first maquette, he developed some other projects for these public labyrinths, and he calls penetrable 10, 11, 12. This is the penetrable 14. In the penetrable 14, it was posthumously built in 2010 by his family. And what you have here are 4 areas for this self-theater, for the free performance. You do whatever you want here. They are divided by these transparent walls, so you are by yourself doing whatever you want, but you can see what's happening here. And you go from one place to the other through these black curtains. It was installed in a park in Brazil for a month. This is another project for a labyrinth. Oh, this is a nice one. It's all dark, and it was built in Rio de Janeiro. The problem is, it's dangerous nowadays to enter a place like this. And this one, when they built it in Rio de Janeiro, you would have to enter with a guard near you. And even this, when it was built in São Paulo, people were attacked inside the labyrinth. So why am I saying that? I'm saying that to discuss with you that we are probably not ready for what Jessica prepared. This one here was installed in 2010 for some time in São Paulo. This is more open. This is a labyrinth where you can play with light and shadows. It's called the light penetrable. This is a nice one for the environment we are now, because it is like this. There is a posthumous installation. And it's always open. It has Mondrian's colors. You enter, you do whatever you want here, and then you go out. It's a shelter for invention. So he called his labyrinths, his public labyrinths, shelters for invention, because the urban space, the city, needed shelters for invention. Places where you would be free and protected to develop your subjectivity through the body, through dance, through performance. This is a very interesting one. It's called the Magic Square number 5. It's beautifully installed in a museum in Rio de Janeiro, which is surrounded by a forest. And it's all open, so it's not dangerous to be here. You enter and you walk through this place, seeing these very colorful walls. And the problem is, this was planned by Jessica in 1978. He died 2 years later. He never saw this built. When his family built this, we didn't know what to do inside this labyrinth. We go into this labyrinth and we have no idea of what to do. We don't know what it is for. It's like a mystery, like Stonehenge, for example. You don't know what this is for. But this is like a ruin from the future. We still don't know what we are supposed to do here. But we have clues. Well, maybe it's a place where you could play, like in a virtual game, but feeling everything that is happening. Maybe it's a place for a ritual, like Stonehenge. Maybe we need rituals. But most of the time, people take a selfie inside the Magic Square number 5. That's what we have become. So, how to use or inhabit Magic Square number 5 nowadays? In Brazil, it's rare enough to find a person reading a book in a park. Who would dance or scream or just stay aimless at this structure he proposes? We are usually plugged 24 hours a day. We are posting pictures. We are navigating in another structure, the internet structure, that could be a virtual space where we would develop something new, we would invent new behaviors. But even the internet has become a technology of neoliberal control? Can we think of anything else besides making a smiling selfie at the Magic Square? We feel awkward inside it because we realize we have no model on how to behave inside it. And it is very uncomfortable for us to realize we exist without any aim, without any purpose, and that no divine or no artistic authority will define for us what we shall do. We have lost the capacity to invent. So nowadays, to aspire to the great labyrinth is to aspire to taking hold of our subjective construction. Not only we are conditioned by neoliberal reason, but also we cease to desire being subjects. It's more comfortable to be an object, circulating on the virtual space of the internet. The challenge is even greater nowadays than in the 70s. And Jessica did this parabola in 1961 saying, be a marginal, be a hero. What is the marginal? The marginal is the one who stays at the margins, who are not in the center, in the hegemonic place. And there is a very interesting parody of Be a Marginal, Be a Hero, which is the Be a Marginal, Be Offline, developed by André Dahmer, an artist in Brazil. So, if not totally offline, be conscious of the control society we live in. If you are an artist, propose something that incites the body towards the great labyrinth. And Jessica, some months before he died, he said during an interview, the average person becomes a visual artist. I've become an instigator of states of invention. So we are open to questions, but I think first we should see what contemporary artists are doing now, and Britta will bring some news about environmental creations. Thank you.
Really warmly Paola Santos Coy to invite me and her whole team, especially David Miranda, for showing me around. The last 2 days was fantastic, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow and Saturday. I've never been in Mexico City before, so for me it's a big challenge. And I also want to thank Paula Braga for this very interesting talk. I think it's a very good idea to have with Jessica the basement fundament from the 60s for what I'm going to talk about now. The invitation from Paula said spaces of immersion, places for the public experience. And I was kind of really amazed, because I thought, how could she know that I'm thinking about this immersive experience also in the context of the Skulpturprojekte, because this was something which was kind of obvious, that I felt a lot of installations were more like spaces where you enter, and then you enter like in a special situation, and it's not like you have a distant position towards a sculpture. So I was very interested in talking about that. And I brought 2 examples from Skulpturprojekte, and I'm also going to talk about a VR film production by Inarudu, which most of you might know, to contextualize the art installations. And maybe just to make clear why it says Urbane Künste Ruhr, this is my new position in the Ruhr area, also dealing with art in public space. And because I'm there now, I want to promote it, of course. When I talk about art in public space, it's always a very foggy term, you know. People have very different expectations. Some people think about sculptures, some people think it's necessarily to be outdoors. For me, public means like very basic, the access for everybody, which is not normal. For example, in Germany, the museums charge quite a lot of entrance. I think it's different here, it's also different in other countries, but this must be like the first thing, that the project you are setting up is accessible for everybody. Another thing is creating an interface, thank you, for various publics means you offer a project, and the project is the reason for various publics which wouldn't meet normally, perhaps, to meet in there. It's like, if you think about filter bubbles, which are more and more dominating our perception of the world, an art and public space project could be a space where you meet people you don't expect to meet and to talk to them, for example, or to share experiences. And then, of course, there's the notion of public and making things public. And in short, it means I'm not talking about public in contrast to private in terms of legal terms. It's not a public space, doesn't necessarily has to be in public ownership, but it means public in creating a public. This could also be an abandoned shop, for example, and private ownership. If you set up a project and you create a public over there, you're doing the project. Art and public space is also very much connected to the question where and which frame the projects take place. Ideas of public space in a small, wealthy, and bourgeois city like Münster, for example, are not comparable with, for example, the situation in Istanbul, Sao Paulo, or Mexico City. Kulturprojekte, especially, is a very well-established institutional format which takes place only every 10 years since 1977 with growing success. Projects which could function as an intervention in another setting easily tend to end up very artificial, very staged, and somehow drama-like in a situation like Münster, where everybody kind of expects them to happen in the frame of the exhibition. We tried to make fun of this in our own communication, working together with a Swedish artist, Samuel Nyholm, alias Sunny. So he set up this cartoon where you get a feeling for the safe and bourgeois situation in Münster, and the cartoon also takes into account that we felt quite early that performance would play a crucial role for the 2017 edition of Kulturprojekte. As curatorial team, we focused on questions of the meaning of sculpture in public sphere in the digitalized reality of the 21st century. This focus, working together with the artists very closely and following their ideas, in many cases ended up in a complete dissolvement of the basic notion of sculpture, like having a fixed place, having material conditions, and endurance. We realized a lot of ephemeral projects, for example, long-time performances, and some projects, one could say, tended towards an idea of immersion. But what does immersion mean in an art context, and if it's not literally connected to the used technologies? Taking 3 artworks published in 2017 as examples, I will try to get closer to this question. I'm going to talk about Pierre Huyg's work for Kulturprojekte in Münster, with the title After, Alive, Ahead, about Mika Rottenberg's Cosmic Generator, which was also realized in Münster, and then draw a line to the VR film production Carnegie Arena by Alejandro Inarritu. Maybe I have to add right away that I didn't choose him because he's one of the most famous Mexican filmmakers, but I wanted to use his VR film installation to contextualize the other works I'm talking about. Immersion is a fashionable and foggy term, but it is interesting to use as a lens. Maybe the French curator and art critic Nicolas Bourriat is a good starting point to get into the subject. Bourriat also worked a lot with Pierre Huyg, Felipe Parino, Dominique González-Förster, all artists which are since the 1990s well known for complex, you could say, immersive installations, or how you would like to call it. Pierre Huyg, for example, doesn't like to call his projects installations. He rather talks about organisms. Bourriat defined the approach of the relational aesthetics in the late 90s as a set of artistic practices which take as their theoretical and practical point of departure the whole of human relations and their social context rather than an independent and private space. The artist can be more accurately viewed as the catalyst in relational arts rather than being at the center. Concerned with human interaction in everyday life, these welcoming, open and frequently collaborative works broke with such modernist truths as the discrete object, the artist's signature and the idea of radicality. Their aim, according to Braga, was not to change the world, but to inhabit it in a better way by stitching social bonds back together. I brought is Tobias Rehberger, Skulpturprojekt in 1997. Since the exhibition only takes place every 10 years, you have really like a very good layer of what's kind of in the air during this decade. In the 1997 exhibition, the idea of this kind of relational aesthetics was quite present. And Tobias Rehberger, for example, he used the rooftop of one building from university for a hangout. There was a lot of DJing going on and so on and so on. And he used the architecture itself as a lamp. This is also the title, Günter's Wiederbeleuchtet, like the light you see is the lamp flashing this space. And the people in Münster, they remember quite well having 3 months, like a new space to enjoy and to hang out. Instead of the aspect of actively collaborating, in Pierre X works, the idea of the equality between plants, animals and humans gets more in the foreground. Remember his amazing work Untitled for Documenta 13. The whole setup was a cosmos living on its own, whether there were people or not. This image was distributed quite often. You have this dog with the pink leg, and then you have these bees around the sculpture. This is only like a very small detail from a huge landscape, which was in the park behind the Friderizianum. And the whole area looked like, could have been like this, like a place where you bring greens to compost. But in fact, it was completely arranged. There was also a lot of ants brought in, and somebody working in the team said he was really like taking care of every little grass, like to have this living picture or living situation. And opposite to the Documenta piece, for the Münster, he chose the former ice ring, which is a completely different situation because you don't pass by or you don't find something which is part of the park, but you have to enter the space. And this was also what he wanted, that he said after having this masterpiece. At Documenta was really a difficult situation to find another like idea which is as strong maybe as this Kassel piece came out. And so we had this empty ice ring, and he started to get very interested in the idea that he can use the building and he can do with the building whatever he wants to do, because it's going to be destroyed later. And there was a time he was also thinking about maybe reactivating the ice, but then he decided to really dig into the ground and quite deep. So what you see here, the earth, which is shaped, was like 2 meters, a bit more than 2 meters, and people walked into this labyrinth. And here you see this little machine. It's an incubator, and in this incubator were cancer cells. And every time when the cells divide, because cancer cells grow by cell division, this was noted. So the whole organism was kind of organized by the division of cancer cells, but also by other elements like CO2 in the air, humidity. There was also the pattern of a shelf in the aquarium. I'm going to show you the aquarium later. And so there was this kind of, it's a biological, technological organism based on algorithms. These cancer cells, for example, we had to renew every week because they were really growing very fast. Here's the aquarium, which was in the middle on this concrete block, and you see the glass of the aquarium has this kind of black tone because you can it can get very dark, like the screen of a mobile phone where you see nothing when it's off, and then the glass has the ability to get transparent, and then you see what's inside. And here you see something like a bit Caspar David Friedrich like setting, quoting the concrete ground of the floor. These pyramids on the rooftop were part of the former installation in the ice ring, but Pierre organized that they could open and close. The first one, where the people are standing underneath, was open all the time, so if there was rain or sun or something, all these came into this setting, and the one in the back was opening and closing according to the division of the cancer cells or to the sounds which were organized by the patterns of the aquarium, of the inside life of the aquarium. In the front, you see this sculpture, which was made out of the earth underneath the concrete floor of the former ice rink, and there were bees inside, and the bees were also part of this organism and flying around. Here you have another perspective where you see this pyramid, which was open all the time. Underneath was also part of concrete, so you had all these kind of very different images in this setting. There were also, during this 3.5 months of exhibition, a lot of grass grow, a lot of little animals came into the scenery. You see here, but 2 peacocks, but they didn't feel so well, so we had to take them out. And add to this, there was also an application for the mobile phone. It's augmented reality, so the pyramids also had this kind of division. You know, the pyramids were flying in the application, and then when they met, new baby pyramids came out of them, also based on an algorithm. So it's a pity if you can't enter this space, but I hope you get at least an idea. After Alive, the title is like a wordplay somehow with after and alive as a short form of artificial life, and ahead, so it's something in between these times. So the next work I'm going to talk about is Mika Rottenberg's Cosmic Generator, also realized in the frame of Kulturprojekte. Here you had a different entering situation. Her installation took place in an abandoned Asia shop. So it's not that you consciously enter this parallel universe, as in the case of Pierre Hugues, but in this case, you see the facade, you see this shop, and the kind of idea this could be a real shop is much more in the air. Even the sign was already there, and it says also video in the sign, which is funny, but because in the end she installed a video installation. Mika Rottenberg already had the basic idea for the film on her first visit to Münster. There was a rough script and an initial plan to travel to the filming location in the Mexicali-Calexico area and the wholesale market in Viu, China. The vacant store across the prison seemed to be the perfect place for the later installation. The film was made with the knowledge that it might be shown in this location. I wrote a small text about this work on another occasion. I'm going to read a bit for you. The door to the store is slightly ajar. Above it is limply hanging a warning that spans the entire shop window with black lettering that reads Asia Shop Lebensmittel, means Asian supermarket groceries. The large windows look dusty, and in the store itself countless rows of shelves filled with just a few products are visible. Is it open? Yes, it is. The glass counter filled top to bottom with all sorts of toys, little gadgets and decorative materials is illuminated with LED light strips. Maybe you just leave it here? Yeah, in the first one. Amid the crude mix of goods and the half-empty shelves, it is the last remaining thing that maintains the appearance of a functioning business. The movement of the blinking lights breathes a little life into the abundant situation. On the shelves were colorful soft drinks, porcelain elephants, and bottles of hair dye and hair extensions. Some of the goods were already in the shop, which Rottenberg left as it was, while others were specially edited. The hair extensions, for example, are linked to the reoccurring motive of extreme physical features. In particular, direct links can be made to the film Cheese from 2008. The unusually long woman's hair serves here as a fictionist means of production seeds. On the wall across from the entrance were rows of large buckets filled with dry food for 365, 175 or 19 days, carefully calculated depending on the number of people. You see it here. In the neighboring room, we see large and flatted pineapple inner tubes, red Asian lamps, and glittering metallic garlands in different colors. Here too, shelves span the walls, but have little on them. The hall looks the same. Rice cookers, ornaments, flower vases, everything seems sticky. Noises, music, and voices lure the visitors into the dark. After crossing a pathway, people suddenly found themselves in a small cinema. On a wall-sized screen, Rottenberg's film, Cosmic Generator, which was completed especially for Kulturprojekte, was running in a loop. There were seats for visitors, in contrast to the movement of one's own body and the uncertain, labyrinthine situation in the front part of the shop. The function and behavior in this room were thus clearly defined: stand or sit down, and above all, watch. That's what we are going to do now. Here is one film still, but I'm going to show you a very short episode from the film. Minutes, but I'm not allowed to have a screening here. I forgot to ask. But I can tell you a bit how it's going on, because these images from the big market in China are kind of intercut with documentary scenes along the border in Mexicali and Calexico. And the way she filmed both situations is completely like the opposite movement. The rather statically filmed shot of the salespeople are interrupted again and again by scenes that were filmed in restaurant kitchens or barely definable rooms along the Mexican-American border. In her first reflections on the film, Mika Rottenberg saw these two movements, which she shows here in the opposite dynamics, as strongly being related: the rapid circulation of cheap Chinese products around the world and the enormously difficulty crossing of the border from Mexico to North America. In the film, we see animated scenes and movie sequences produced in the studio combined with documentary footage. In the same way, the shop as an installation combines a documentary ready-made situation with artificially added arrangements and materials. In the film and the installation, it is sometimes difficult to distinguish what is a documentary film image or an existing setting and what has been staged. For example, the saleswoman, I think these images seem like could be staged. They seem completely arranged, but these are documentary images. The boundaries are blurred, and both worlds seem equally absurd, not least because they include the same goods and services. In earlier installations, Mika Rottenberg often built her own spaces that combine a sculptural situation with moving images. At Kulturprojekt 2017, the shop and its contents became a quasi-documentary setting, which, like any idea of documentation, never objectively reflects anything or exists on its own. The products in the store, whether they were there before or were added by the artist, exemplify a temporary end to the sales channels that start in places like the wholesale market in Viu. Their final destination will probably be a private household for which they are acquired and from which they will continue to migrate, ultimately to the garbage. Therein lies the special intensity of the installation, the voyeuristic view of the situation coincidence with the voyeuristic view of the movie screen. The moving image and the movement of one's own body through the shop are held together and interwoven by a deeply sculptural aesthetic. Not as least, the film tunnel rides are through truly sculptural form of movement. So now I'm getting to the last example. Alejandro González Inarritu, Carnegie Arena. He worked 6 years on this project. Oh, we have to find the film. Yeah. And he did a lot of interviews and research, but was also published in 2017. So I thought this is also interesting. This is like the production or like examples of the production in the year 2017. And you, so this is the trailer where you also see the making of, because Naruto was working with a lot of the illegal migrants, first listening to their experience, but then also asking them to perform in the studio, in the motion capture studio, for shooting the VR film documentary. The whole film has 6.5 minutes. I don't know how many of you have maybe seen it. I heard it was on display here for 6 months, but you can only enter as a single person and you get time slots of 10 minutes. So I experienced it in Milan. It was very heavy to get a ticket to get in there. It was kind of booked out, but I was very curious to see it. And in Milan was a very special experience because it's the Prada Foundation, so it's a very, very rich collection. And then they have this installation. You have to put off your shoes, but they give you silk socks to don't get dirty feet. But the whole idea is that in terms of immersion, you should have a real experience of being in the desert or something. And then, as you saw in this little trailer, there is, for example, this helicopter movement, and of course, the kind of very well done tone and imagery that give you really the feeling of somehow being in the scenery. But of course, for example, the cameras, they read you where you are in the space, and then the images are directed that, for example, track of migrants falls in front of your feet. And what you do automatically is like trying to help something, and then you grab into the emptiness. And this is something which is very special in this experience, I would say. I had to think of this theory of Susan Sontag. She brought this up in the 70s in her essay on photography, where she said the war photographer is always somebody like a victim. No. he proves what happened, but at the same time he didn't interfere, or he didn't help. And this is a feeling which was very strong for me in this installation. Otherwise, in terms of immersion, it's like the technical possibilities you can bring to the top by this. And I would say, like in a short critical review, it's good for empathy. It's good to maybe get a strong feeling for the situation itself. But there is a big lack of political analysis, in my opinion, and in comparison to the two works I talked about before. They have this kind of gaps, or they have this kind of non-documentary parts of living, like on Pierre each part, the organism which has its own life, which is not controllable, even not in the full end by Pierre himself. And in the case of Migrotmek, we have very important gaps somehow in the storytelling, but also from like the own body movement in the first part of the shop to this moment where you end up sitting in the movies, and then there is a defined situation. So I think maybe this is enough input. Also, if we get back to the Helio to Otoshika, and I'm looking forward to talk to you.
About such complex artworks that are really multidimensional in all the aspects that they touch, which the body, philosophy, public space, immersion, political participation, spectatorship. So there's many layers that I think are happening with these pieces that you presented. I prepared some questions, more general, in terms of public space and immersion and the production of subjectivity through some of these artworks. But really what we would like is for everyone here to participate with any questions or comments. So maybe I'll make a question, we begin, and then please everyone interrupt or whenever you want, so that we can, there's another microphone over there, and we can play with the Spanish and the English, you know, so. Yeah, we can't see you very well because of the lights. So yeah, but if we make funny faces, it's just because of that. I wanted to ask both of you, in very diverse experiences of these pieces that you presented, how you've understood these projects in terms of how they formed publics. I think if subjectivities and identities are in perpetual flux, how can we think of people engaging with these pieces as they are interacting with these transformations of subjectivities? So I'm thinking in terms of how public space is not a pre-given entity that's created for the users, but it's the users of public space who create that space. So that's the question. How our subjectivities are in constant flux and transformation, and how we can relate to pieces that are in public space, and how these also change our perception.
I think that just by not being the most common and quotidian experience, works that propose an immersion in public spaces already have a big role in the expansions of our opportunities to be, in our opportunities to develop what we want to be. And then the idea of the shelter that Jessica proposes is unavoidable. That public spaces that contains artworks for immersion are shelters, because other than these places, you don't have that many opportunities to be with yourself or to experience something which is not determined by the economic model we live in.
Question, right? But as I tried to point out in the very beginning, I think these projects in public space, they kind of offer an experience also for a non-art audience, not looking for it. It could be by chance. And if they have this quality, for example, like the Rottenberg, to be very challenging or very, like you get very curious what's happening in here. You don't know what kind of space is it, and you see the video and it's kind of grabbing you into this tunnel situation. And so this can be a very strong experience, also for subjectivity, but also to enter an atmosphere which you maybe were not confronted with before. So I'm really very interested in a wider public and art in public space without being a missionary or something, has this potential for an encounter which wasn't expected before, for example, and for also that also means, in my opinion, an encounter with art which is not like shaped before through expectations or something.
Would anyone like to talk about maybe their own experiences with immersive pieces or with public space projects? I think there are some people here who worked with public space also, like Armando. Okay. When you
I'm going to try to make a coherent question.
Okay. My question would be regarding, on one side, this idea of contrast in Elio Tichica. He was reading Guy Debord and Deleuze, and at the same time proposing a counter-concept. And then this idea of the public and mediated through art, but for more like audiences. And how the selfie, because I understand that both are working with like new technologies and how that mediates our relationships with other human beings, like how the idea of the selfie enters this aspect of the public, the space, the art experience for everyone. So more or less, I hope.
The selfie, as I see it, is the transformation of the subject in an object. So we live in an economic organization in which we value objects and desire is related to objects. Therefore, we want to be objects. When you post a selfie on the internet, you are trying to present yourself as a desirable object, as a product in the market of the network. So, Oiticica has some works, it's interesting, in which he makes portraits of other people and in a very queer fashion, avant la lettre. The queer, it was not a theoretical subject by the time he did it, but he was photographing his boyfriends with red lipsticks, and he did a audio visual, because that's how it was called in the 70s, the audio visual, in which you had sounds and slides projected. And the only space for freedom that I see on our new habit of posting selfies is related to a queer claim for alternative sexualities or gender performation, gender perform. performance. Sorry, it's late. So, the only way I think selfies can be a tool for freedom is through gender performance. Proposing alternatives to normative gender definitions.
I don't really understand, because I'm very much focusing on the subject of immersion, how you then grab the bridge to the selfie discussion, because of course it has to do with the digital, but as Paula said, it has a lot to do with the market of intention, and it's something which is very outgoing. It's a signal you send from yourself to the others. But it's nothing, like in comparison to these immersive installations I was talking about, it's nothing which kind of gets you into the situation or into the world. It's like really, I would say, the opposite. And I was also thinking about Otuchika, the installation you showed, the Central Park project. I was, on one hand, really fascinating, I think, the idea to have in the park this space with the different cells. But I was also wondering about this concept with transparent between the cells, because this really focuses on the individual, and the social aspect is, maybe it's because it's the time, or I don't know, seems to be more like a burden or something which you have to control. And so it's not a social sculpture in terms of people gathering, having communication and exchange, I would say.
Yeah. I have two comments to do. I think the selfie can be understood as something that you perform on this immersive environment of the internet, because you are performing something there when you present yourself on the internet. So if you understand the internet as a space, then it works. That's how I took this question. Well, it is a very good point you are making. If the individual performance that the structures that Jessica proposes, if this individual performance somehow blocks the possibility of collective interaction. What I think he wanted is first to work on the individual, because he was going against the concept of the mass, being part of the mass. So first develop yourself as a singularity, and then commune with others. That's how I see he's moving from the individual to the collective. But he has texts by the end of his life, which he didn't finish to write, in which he was exactly studying this passage from the individual to the collective.
Yes, I think in relation to the selfie in a way, but there's been an interesting movement, like from the self-portrait to the production of subjectivity to the selfie, no? And for a long time, I think the promise of art, especially art institutionalized through museums, was to create this public space where you could form yourself, and you would find yourself in these artworks. And many artists, I think, started leaving that space of the museum because it didn't seem to be keeping that promise in a way, and moving to the public space, and to begin to create that kind of experience where you're continuously performing your production of identity and subjecthood. For me, there were two interesting concepts of the penetration, the penetrables, and the going into the pieces that you produced, and how a lot of these pieces have to do with time and movement. So they require the users or the spectators to move through space. So you enter one way and hopefully you leave in a different state. No? I don't know if you want to comment.
I think it's a perfect observation. They are like portals that you traverse, and then you are one when you enter and you are different when you go out. And I didn't show some works by Jessica from 1979, which have this shape of passing through. While Britta answers, I'll try to find these images here. I think I have it. But sure, they are spaces of transition, I believe.
I don't really know if I have to say something about it. Maybe just like an information, there was no limited time in the installations. So this was also for all the installations the same, that once you have been in there, you could stay as long as you wanted to. There was one problem, or there were a few cues, because, for example, the installation by Gregor Schneider could only be entered as a solo person, so people queued a lot. And also one piece, like a long-term performance piece by Alexandra Pirici, which was meant as a loop that people come in and then go out, was kind of misunderstood by the audience as a theater play. So they intended to be there and to watch the whole loop, which was 3/4 of an hour, which is on one hand like really nice and remarkable that people take their time to spend so much time there, but on the other hand, it caused the effect that people were queuing, which was not very nice, because nobody likes to queue somewhere. But the basic decision was not to say you have 10 minutes and then you have to get out. Very important, I think.
I'm thinking of the audience, particularly in Kulturprojekte in Münster, since it's this project that happens every 10 years, but also a lot of pieces stay there and become permanent. So I would like to think the city has an audience that is already familiar with what's happening, every 10 years. But my question is whether between those 10 years, are there programs that Kulturprojekte organizes, kind of a follow-up of their audience? Is there something happening in between, or really it's only this jump from between 10 years and another 10 years? And especially also thinking that there's a lot of potential there with this different audiences also that could get involved in different ways in the discussion, and not only as recipients, or even producers of something.
Maybe to give you a really short idea of the history, the first edition in 1977, there was a lot of critique. People really hated the exhibition. There was no fun, very little money for it. It was a huge effort to do it, and it wasn't meant to be a decennial exhibition from the very beginning. But in 1987 there was a situation, like more a personal situation, has to do with Klaus Bussmann, who was first curator at the museum, later director, but in between fired. And in 1987 he just 1985 came back to the museum as a director, which was very nice. And Kaspar Koenig was one of the next to Bussmann, the main figure for 1977. And then they celebrated in 1987 that it's 10 years since they had the experience with this first exhibition, which was so hated so much, but on the other side, which was so exciting and left so much really interesting artworks in the city. And then the next decision to get it into a more regular format was to do it again in 1997. But only then you can say it starts to be institutionalized. Before that was always like a negotiation if it should take place. And also for the 2027 edition, of course the discussion starts now, but money has to be collected, and there is not like a real regular public program in between. But the archive of Skulpturprojekte, which is part of the museum in Münster, is now in much better condition than it was before. My colleague Marianne Wagner, she is the curator for the contemporary section of the museum, and we were in a team together for Skulpturprojekte in 2017. She applied for Volkswagen money to work on the archive. So this is something which starts now and which is very present in the museum. They have little shows out of the archive, and I think in a few years all the fruits, like doing research on the archive, will be made available. There is another publication in the pipeline reviewing the 5 exhibitions, not chronologically, but for example taking some theme as a red line through all the 5, or taking artists who were involved every time, for example like Michael Escher, but he wasn't involved in 2017, but very present through an archival exhibition. So there are some like points to get into this like 40 years history.
I wanted to talk. I wanted to ask something about the. Thinking about how you see Oiticica's work. It seems to be like you have like a very positive idea of how this outcome of the people using the pieces can be. So, taking that in consideration, and also the way I think and the way I work, I wanted to ask you about the possibility of people being instrumentalized by this kind of immersive experience. Not only in Oiticica's case, but something like whatever reference it can be.
As you were saying that I have a very positive approach to the ability these works have on building subjectivity, I was thinking that actually I have this positive approach to the set of his environments, his texts that write about his environments and texts. I think maybe only staying there, if you are unaware of contemporary art, you are totally unaware of his work, and then you enter a Cosmococa, you might just replicate the behavior you have every time you see a hammock, because the Cosmococas have the hammocks. And so I think it's very important the work that art critics do when they write about the work and they let people understand what the work wants to do with the public. Regarding people being instrumentalized inside these immersive environments, I think they are so open that I don't think they instrumentalize people, because most of the time you don't even know what to do inside these places. You just see that there is a hammock, okay, there are some projections of Jimi Hendrix album cover on the walls, and what am I supposed to do here? Well, maybe I'll just lay down on a hammock and swing a little and listen to this music. So you have to invent what to do there.
I think with instrumentalization, it's been a big issue around art in public spaces, because there tends to be a discussion on how these pieces have a specific function, no? And not the idea of art for art's sake, but whether we have to create pieces that have a specific function for public space. And that's when instrumentalization can come into shaping our behaviors and our relationships with other people. But hopefully a lot of these experiences have to do with liberating the neurosis that comes from repressing a lot of these desires that you were speaking about. And yes, just as a space for liberating these repressed emotions and mobilizing a lot of affects between everyone who's experiencing the immersion, no?
I'm just curious how you would define immersion, because the way we are talking about it is so inflationary that everything could be immersive or not, or whatever. I would be interested in really to getting closer to the idea of immersion. Because, for example, Otoshika, on one hand, I understand that you kind of get lost in this labyrinth, and I think this is very immersive. But, for example, the latest piece you showed with the colorful elements, for me, it's an object. It's really an object, and of course, you can move through, but it's an object. I wouldn't call it immersive, because then everything really gets somehow immersive. And also you get this interesting, but you also get very close to the idea of furniture in public space. So you have to know a lot about it, or it really depends on where it's installed and how it's embedded in the neighborhood. If it's really like a good piece and good working in meaning of having a good, interesting atmosphere and approach, and you can kind of feel welcome to appreciate it, or if it's, as you kind of mentioned, I guess, is it there to decorate a place, or is it there to maybe take care that people don't gather there? This is also sometimes function of art in public space, to put a sculpture and to kind of get rid of other things which happen there. So I'm only from the picture, I cannot really say what's it about.
Yes, I understand immersion as something opposed to contemplation. So immersion in the sense that you have to be there with your whole body, and your whole body will be the 5 senses and movement. It's very important that you have your body in movement inside these environments. He never called them immersive, they call them environmental or ambiental.
Or sculpture, because this is the main condition of sculpture, that you have to move like it's an installation, but you have to move around the sculpture always. It's always body movement.
The difference here is that for sculpture, there is an exterior relationship between the spectator and the work. And here, you don't have the spectator, you have what he calls participator. So you are actually within the work. It's like stepping into a painting, as if you could do it.
I think one of the aspects that maybe makes these environments different is also the temporal aspect. When these pieces ask you to move through them, then they become about time as well, as opposed to the viewing, which is kind of in a different aspect. I think for me it works to think of the public sphere as a space that's already full of contradictions anyway, and that makes for the political discussion of what the public sphere actually is, you know, which is where we form these subjectivities, but then it becomes a discussion on who has access to public space, who's moving through it, who can talk from it, who can produce within it. So I think some of the pieces are very interesting in terms that they invite you to come into, but also I've read about how any production of space will exclude anyway, because space excludes another space, right? So there's also a violence in that. Despite the intent to become inclusive, I think it's almost impossible. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on.
Yeah, I was thinking about this possibility. It's not a possibility. For me, it's a fact. You can see it in a few examples that I don't have in hand right now, but you become somehow like a power figure if you generate if you have the ability to generate a space and a set of ideas and a set of maybe possibilities of behavior that can be happening inside, you get into this position that it's contradictory. Basically that. It's a very strange point because you're making something bad and something good at the same time. But it's a nice feeling for me. Right. I don't know. Whether could you talk about it?
And then, because Paula asked for the permanent works in Münster, I just remembered that I didn't answer this question or didn't comment it on this, but now it fits also to this discussion, because I think one really benefit of permanent works is that you can appreciate them from time to time. You can kind of really have a relationship with them. You can have one day where you say, oh, maybe 1 year where you say it's not interesting for me at all, and then another year suddenly discovering the piece and always passing by and then getting like a really new inspiration and interest in the piece, and this is amazing. So in contrast to a lot of my colleagues who really are not so much friends of permanent artworks, I really appreciate them if they're really in a very good situation, site-specific, and if it's very good artwork, of course. Otherwise, you have a lot, much too many sketches everywhere, and that's what I meant with the idea of furniture. But yeah, it's nice, and you also have these kind of time layers. Now, getting back to Münster, that you know. These sculptures came there, for example, 1977, and then you have 40 years, and you can kind of put them in relation to what it was in 1987, or you can ask yourself if they're still powerful. There is one like really good example by Bruce Nauman. He proposed the square depression, like in the pyramid, which is going down in the ground, in 1977, and his proposal was really in the desk for 30 years, and then realized in 2007. And this is one of my really favorite public sculptures. It's amazing. And it also has, maybe if we're still kind of moving around this idea of immersion, it also has this moment where you can be inside and hide inside, because it's in the lowest point, about 2 meters deep, and from very far distance you don't see somebody who's inside the square depression, because the pyramid is going inside. But as close as you get, the person who's inside is really on stage. So he's playing a lot with this idea of being on stage in this white concrete pyramid, or hiding in the landscape.
I was also thinking of how public space seems to be a question. It's a continuous question. It's never a resolved issue, because it's contradictory in itself in terms of how, and I think that's a positive thing, it's not possible still to predetermine all of people's reactions, and I think that's wonderful, that we can't control what's going to happen. So you have to be able to respond very quickly in these projects as a curator or as the artist to the situation that's happening, no? I wanted to ask you, Paula, when you make the question of are we ready for Jessica's proposal, and how that question works for our current situation.
We are not. We are less prepared now than we were in 1970. I mean, we are living a time in which we all want to be the same. We all follow models. People, mainly in Brazil now, we are about to have the second turn of the elections, and people cannot think about what they are doing when most of the people are voting for a guy who does not accept alternative sexualities out of the normative one. And I think we are living a very sad time in which we will have to recover the capacity of being ourselves and thinking by ourselves. And the cultural industry has the help now of all the vigilance system of the internet, and people feel they are being watched all the time, so they have to behave in a certain manner all the time. And this is terrible, and I think this kind of environments, or at least listening about this kind of environments, can break something in this model of repetitive behavior.
Vamos a terminar in about 5 minutes, como en 5 minutos. Entonces, y podemos seguir platicando allá con el café y las cervezas, pero no sé si alguien quiera compartir otra pregunta, comentario antes de movernos.
Bueno, hace ratito, Jess, tú decías que como la volatilidad del espacio público y de las experiencias en el espacio público requieren del artista o del curador estar alerta para actuar rápidamente y ser creativos, pero también, y es un reto también de la era, es ser mucho más pacientes. O sea, como justo la experiencia en el espacio público requiere también tener una habilidad de espera de larga duración que no tenemos y que no estamos acostumbrados a destinarle a un tiempo, ¿no? Por la necesidad de una respuesta o de un escenario inmediato. Entonces también se trata de una observación, pues, no geológica, pero de mayor duración.
If I understood right, for the short translation, was that you said projects or like developments in public space need time, and it shouldn't be too over-shaped or over-curated or over-formed by artists and curators, and I think you're completely right, but I would say everything could exist next to each other. You can, because I work in exhibition-like formats, for me it's very important that there is the possibility to have relations between different artistic positions, to really kind of get into one theme, not literally like in a seminar, but to see artists working with some questions, and then not to take the one artwork as the only possible answer, but to have really different positions, which sometimes are arguing with different means for the same thing, but also sometimes they kind of really are very different from each other. So this would be for me the benefit of exhibiting in an exhibition-like format in public space. But this shouldn't be the only thing, this is for sure. So if there is a space which gets its own use, what sometimes happens in public plazas, for example, that suddenly there is, I don't know, a movement of neighbors, and they bring food and they gather there and they start to build maybe small furniture or whatever to have a better hangout there. Of course, this is very important, and this is much stronger often than a lot of artworks can be, that's for sure. But I wouldn't put the other one against the other one.
I think it takes time, and I think you are right. We have even to have compassion for ourselves and think that we will surpass this state of things in which we are, and potency is there. Maybe it's not showing up now, everything that this energy can do, but it is in potential state, and it will emerge soon.
Yes, I think about time as well in terms of how when we create a public space through these artworks, it also makes us question our position, like a subject positionality. And when these artworks produce these new spaces and new configurations of experience, you need time to think of what's your relationship and your subject position to that proposal. So in that way, yeah, I think a lot that happens so fast, and we have to de-accelerate what's happening and be able to be with ourselves, as you were saying at the beginning. You know? Do you want to close with something in particular? ¿Alguien más? ¿Algún comentario? Y si no, pasamos allá. Pues muchísimas gracias a todas y a todos. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Britta.